All right. So we're going to wait just a little bit, like maybe 3 minutes, see if some other folks start trickling in, but we'll get started. But before we get into that, much like Ian had done, this is about healing really, and making sure that you are as well as possible. And before I start rambling and talking your ear off and showing you guys some different demonstrations and all that, let's just do a quick posture check. So what is a posture check? For me, when I'm, especially now during COVID, when I'm online collaborating with other creators, or I'm just hanging out with my friends on something like Discord, or watching something on Twitch. I'm a big fan of video games. Every now and then I'll try to remind people of their posture, because a lot of times, I'm going to try to demonstrate this, give you guys a nice profile view. We hunch over a bunch when we're sitting at our computer, or we're sitting down at a desk. If we're reading something, if we're on our laptop, whatever the case is, we have a tendency to hunch over. And this posture really, really breaks down pretty much all of the natural biomechanics that your body would like to exist in. So you're constricting first of all, your respiratory system, you're compressing your own lungs, and you're shortening all the different organs that you have along the median line in the center of your body, which will eventually cause, you to feel not just bad in the short term, but in the long term, you'll start to feel aches and pains and things like that. So in order to correct this, very simple. Instead of having your shoulders ahead of where your collarbone is, you're simply going to roll your shoulders back. And it's almost like you're sticking your chest out, but you're not you're not trying to thrust or anything. You're just simply rolling the shoulders back. And already you can see, just from taking my deltoids from ahead of my pectoralis, like it's competing for that spot in first place, we're just going to roll it back, and it's going to chill, in the back. And that right there allows my spine to curve naturally, right? So I don't want this rounded back. It's going to put stress on my lower lumbar. It's going to put stress on the thoracic. We don't need to deal with any of that. So foundational is your posture. And we're just about getting to 2:30. So I'll go ahead and segue right into what we're actually going to be discussing and doing. But there's another reason I decided to talk about posture, and that wasn't simply limited to you being on your computer or being at a desk or looking right. So this has to do a great deal with your self-defense. And when we talk about self-defense, first of all, I have to define that. So for me, self-defense is not you learning a bunch of different lethal techniques, or getting a gun or getting a knife and shooting or stabbing people who frighten you. That's not self-defense. At that point, you're being reckless, and you're a threat to yourself and other people. Self-defense is the act of self-preservation in such a way that does not add to the chaos of the situation. Basically, you're not making things worse in the way that you respond. You make things better. And one of the easier ways to do that, when you're engaged in self-defense, the first thing that you have, the first line of self-defense that you possess as a human being, is how you look. So human beings, you'll notice, we don't have eyes on the sides of our skull, right? For better or worse, probably better. We don't have our eyes located on the side of our skull. Now, this is a evolutionary trait. Most prey animals or herbivores will have eyes on their side. They're trying to look out for danger so that they can respond to it. Humans and a bunch of other mammals and a bunch of other creatures out there have front-facing eyes. And that seems to be a trait of predators, people that go out on the hunt. And the reason that's important is because what we put into our visual range and what is presented there informs a great deal of our actions. So every other human being on the planet is coming out of this sort of evolutionary background, this foundation. So when I talk about posture and why that's so important, if you're walking down the street, say you got your AirPods in, I don't have AirPods, but pretend these are AirPods. I'm hunched over, I've got my phone in my hand, I'm staring down, almost like I'm looking at the ground, and my posture is hunched over like this. I look like a prey animal. basically. I look vulnerable. I look weak. I look easy to be preyed upon. So one of the first things that you can do that will decrease your likelihood of being targeted by anybody is fixing your posture. Don't look like you are a prey animal. Don't look like you are waiting for something bad to happen to you. Look like you know what you're doing, you know exactly where you're going, and you've got a mission, and you've got a purpose. Not only will this benefit you psychologically in your own mind, when you adjust your posture, you stand up straight, shoulders back, chest somewhat out, chin up, as opposed to tucked and you're staring at the floor. When you present that profile and that anterior to other human beings and even other mammals, other creatures, there's a pause there subconsciously, and they recognize, this person's paying attention. I better not mess with this guy. You don't have to have huge muscles. You don't have to be The Rock. You don't have to be, Half-Sore Thorson, whatever, the mountain from Game of Thrones. You don't have to be a big, meaty guy in order to dissuade people from taking physical action or preying upon you in any other fashion. Most of human communication, you learn this through, if you study basically any sort of psychology, most of human communication is nonverbal, the vast majority of it. The estimate ranges from somewhere between 85% and like 90+% of communication is nonverbal. So even now, as you're looking at my face, as you're looking at everything that I'm presenting on my screen, the majority of what your brain is encoding via your visuals, via your oculars, is not my voice, it's my facial expression, where my eyes are moving. What am I doing with my jawline? What am I doing with my teeth? What am I doing with my eyes? Am I squinting? Are they wide? What am I doing with my hands? What is the other position of my body? When you're not cognizant of these things and you're just letting yourself sort of get lax and, you tend to curl in almost like you're a shrimp or a clam, you're curling in on yourself. It communicates something very, very negative and very, very vulnerable to other people. So one of the best things that you can do is adjust your posture. So continuing on with that, as opposed to trying to show you guys some fancy techniques or get up here and do jujitsu or judo or karate or, start body slamming dummies or anything like that. Self-defense is a state of mind. It's not how many tools you have physically. It's not so much to do with your skills as it is your mentality. And I'll break this down again using some biological examples from the animal kingdom and then relating that into human beings. So one prey animal, the tiger, for example, it's a massive creature, 400+ pounds of just sheer predator muscle. It has something ridiculous, like a 15-foot vertical leap. It can go like, goodness knows how long in a long jump. It has insane claws, powerful jaws, extremely keen eyesight, natural camouflage. It can see in the dark. It can swim. It can climb trees. You don't want to mess with a tiger. But people who live around tigers figured out something interesting about them. It turns out that they are very reliant, despite all that physical prowess, that natural physical prowess, the fangs, the claws, the ability to pounce and move silently with their padded feet. They heavily rely on the element of surprise. So much so that if you remove the element surprise from an apex predator like a tiger, it backs down. Even from a clearly physically weaker specimen. So if you took me or any other human being, you put it in front of a tiger, I don't care how badass you think you are. If that tiger wanted you dead, you'd be dead. But if a tiger is moving up, stalking you from behind, you hear it and you turn and look at it, the tiger freezes. And if you maintain your gaze, you will continue to assign your attention to the would-be predator, it retreats. The tiger, the physically more powerful specimen that could 100% without a doubt slaughter a human being, retreats upon locking eyes with that creature and knowing that they know that they're there. Very interesting. In the same way, human beings who who have more of a criminal element and a more predatory element operate in the exact same fashion. So do not underestimate the ability, the psychological advantage of the element of surprise, of hunting somebody when they have no idea, right? And this is why the posture is so important. The other reason why the posture, or continuing on why the posture is important, is because it actually allows you to survey your environment and pay attention. If I'm hunched over, staring at my feet while I'm walking, I have no idea what's going on around me. None. To make it worse, add the AirPods in, I'm blasting music, I can't hear somebody running up behind me. It's easy, it's too easy. It's child's play to get taken advantage of at that point. So by unfurling that posture, shoulders back, chest up, chin up, and you're able to what? Put something that you might hear on television or in some action movies, keep your head on a swivel. And what does that mean? It just means look around. Use your forward-facing eyes and assign attention to your environment around you. And if you see other human beings there or other potential threats, make contact visually, confirm that they're there, and even let them know that you can see them. Because just that will heavily deter somebody from choosing you as their next target. Within sociology, there's a lot of different work done on criminals. Obviously, people want to know why people commit crimes and how they commit crimes and why choose the victims that they choose. What they found was, throughout all this research, when they communicated with rapists, with muggers, with other people who engage in battery, assault, or other crimes so that have a more physical nature to them, when they asked them how did they determine their victim, every time it had to do with how that victim presented themselves. Not necessarily what they were wearing, right? Not even skin tone or not even necessarily gender, right? The biggest predictor for you being chosen as a target is your posture, how you are communicating non-verbally to all the other human beings in your environment. So just to recap, not only is the posture good for you, healthy, you open up the respiratory system, you're encouraging circulation throughout your body, but you're also protecting yourself by exposing what is a vulnerability. And that communicates confidence and preparedness to other people in your environment subconsciously. So that when they assign their attention to you, they're not saying, okay, I'm looking at Bridget. She looks like she'd be an easy mark. She's not paying attention. She's staring at her feet. She's curled up. She looks like a shrimp. She doesn't look like a human. That one's an easy target. As soon as you switch that around, the game becomes completely different. The story they tell themselves about you becomes completely different. And this can help you if you're in school, if you're at a workplace, we've all been around these types of people, bullies, right? Bullies, for lack of a better term. People who are arrogant, people who are used to swinging their weight around and pushing around other people because they look weak. They look like they're not going to fight back. Bullies don't go around picking fights with people that look imposing. They go around tormenting people who they have an idea in their head, who they have reason to believe will not defend themselves or fight back. In the same way, not all of the other criminal elements, but the majority of other criminal elements are the same thing. They're not going after somebody who looks ready for a fight. They're going after people who are weak because, well, you could argue in turn that they are actually weak themselves. And I actually adhere to that particular theory. The predator, barring, the obvious apex predators in the animal kingdom, within humanity, they're not necessarily smarter than you. They're not necessarily stronger or faster. They're just more prepared. That's it. They go out looking for that sort of trouble. And when they see somebody presenting themselves in that fashion, they're like, aha, that's my next mark right there. Not paying attention, looks weak. Easy day. That's what they think. But as soon as you uncurl, start assigning your attention, you turn and you look at that person, the element of surprise is lost. And the picture that you exude about yourself also completely changes, and thereby affecting their perception as you as a viable target. Completely changes the game, completely. So it's pretty it's pretty amazing, actually, the things that you can do, a level of defense that you can achieve without having to be able to deadlift 400 pounds or bench press, twice your body weight or whatever the case is. You do not need to be a superstar athlete in order to be successful in defending yourself. What you actually need to be is mentally prepared, cognizant of your own tics, your own habits, and how you present yourself to the environment around you. Those things, more than anything else, are what is going to keep you safe. Not any particular weapon or technique. Now, don't get me wrong, having martial arts and knowing how to punch, knowing how to kick, knowing how to take a punch, how to take a kick, how to avoid, how to run away, all of those things are fantastic techniques that you should get familiar with. But before all of that, you've got to get it in your mind that you're not prey. You're not a piece of meat on the market for other people to consume. You're a human being. Your life has meaning. Your life has value. So you're going to act like it. And even if you don't believe those things, fake it. Fake it. There are plenty of people that bluff, right? We see this in the animal kingdom all the time. What do cats do when they're frightened? They turn on their side and they try to make themselves look as big as possible to the predator. And the predator is like, whoa, wait a minute. That little thing just became suddenly big, in their animal brains. They're like, whoa, this thing is not what I thought it was. Let me back up, right? So the cat will mess up a dog, with their claws and their biting. They're very agile creatures. But, a mastiff versus any other cat's going to get torn apart, right? But the cat just displaying that bravado deters, again, that physically more capable creature from engaging them in violence. And I think there's several lessons that we can take away from that as human beings. So Scott asked, can I address how posture might deter sexual harassers for women? Well, it's the same principle from what I described. Rapists, when they're looking for their targets, they are looking for the people that don't look like they're all there, which is one of the reasons why that a lot of sexual assault, one, happens within a domicile, right? It doesn't actually happen on the street. The majority of women who suffer sexual harassment or assault, it doesn't happen on the street. It happens inside of a home. It happens inside of a building, right? The other portion of that is it happens where there is typically some sort of alcohol or any type of substance consumption going on. And the reason for that is because they know those things tend to loosen people up. Basically, it gets them to drop their guard. Gets them to drop their guard down. So even if, for example, you're in a club, and I currently reside in a fairly large city in Boston. I've been to clubs with women and men, and I've seen some female compatriots of mine get pursued doggedly by men that want to dance with them or whatever. Right? They're clearly uncomfortable with the situation. But I noticed that the times where I had to intervene on their behalf was when that posture wasn't there. They got real down. They tend to close up, right? Look down, look away. Oh, just don't look at him, ignore him. It's the complete opposite of what you want to do, as uncomfortable as it is. And believe me, I know that's uncomfortable. For a woman to assign their attention to somebody that they're trying to get away from, it's like the opposite of what you want to do. You just want to just turn into a ball. You want to disappear, right? But in doing that, you communicate to that, basically the predator in that moment, like, okay, she's not going to fight back. She's not going to do anything to defend herself. She's not even saying anything, be above a whisper. I can't even, hear, right? So even the posture, once again, is so critical because it also naturally allows you to project your voice. So me right now, if I'm hunched over and I'm talking, you could see the change in the volume and the cadence. But as soon as I unfurl that posture, right, now my voice is being projected that much more effectively. And now if I'm looking at you, right, and I say stop, you're far more likely to stop during that interaction as opposed to me down here trying to disappear, trying to just melt into the floor or the wall and saying, stop. And my voice is low and I'm kind of mumbling to myself and I'm not making eye contact, right? So all of those things right? Even before you get to the verbal component of it, which is telling the person to stop, right? Using your voice is very important. But even before we get to that point, your posture, again, that nonverbal communication tells it can, like, please do not underestimate it. Do not underestimate the power of nonverbal communication. Now, obviously, there are cases where that person is, that predator is going to be determined to bring nightmare, basically, to victimize you, right? There are going to be situations where the nonverbal communication is not going to be enough, right? It'll be enough to deter quite a bit of people, but when somebody is in your face, that's where the verbal component and the physical component of creating space between you and your would-be oppressor become critical. So the reason why posture, again, might deter the sexual harassers is because that nonverbal communication is so critical. And these, once again, the people that do these things are looking for weak people. They're looking for weak people, okay? So it's not very often that you'll see a case of that happening, and then all the news you see like She-Hulk, right? You don't see somebody that looks very physically imposing. Even though I'm not saying it doesn't happen to those people, not trying to get into that fallacy at all. But what I am saying is that these people are going after people they perceive as weak, people that they think or they know won't defend themselves. So when you fix your posture, you're communicating that you're somebody who will defend themselves, who knows their own self-worth and will do something about it. And that psychological game by itself is what will grant you that deterrence. So that's an excellent question. Thank you for that question. So now, physical fitness. Okay, what does that have to do with healing, and what might that have to do with self-defense? So you could make the argument that, hey man, it's all about skill. You don't need to be any kind of fit in order to defend yourself. And I would tentatively agree with that. But in actuality, in reality, your level of fitness does determine your ability or your capacity to defend yourself. But even before that, it affects your capacity to go through trying times mentally. So I'm gonna make a transition now into the fitness component and talk about first, again, similar to self-defense, why it's not physical, it's actually mental. So if any of you guys have played any sports, or you decided to try to get in shape, or you decided just, let's say you're already in shape and you just want to take your physicality or your physique to the next level, it takes quite a bit of work to get to that point. And the work that I'm talking about is the mental work that you have to do. You have to get yourself mentally prepared to make the sacrifices and suffer correctly in order to achieve your goals. Oftentimes, when you talk to people that are athletes, they're used to the work. It's easy for them. It becomes easy for them because they had become stronger. And when you talk to them, so what do you think about the process? Were you worried about, the weight that you're going to have to be lifting, or how many hill sprints you're going to have to do? And all of them just, they shake their heads, and they get real thoughtful. And like, no, it's actually, getting myself to do it, convincing myself that it's something that I needed to do. It's the hardest portion. And so I'll give you another example for this. The late and great Muhammad Ali talked about the importance of that mentality. And one of the things that he had to do in order to train was to motivate himself, was to ignite that spark. Now, I'll get into why, I might mention why motivation is not that helpful, or why it's overly indexed, it's overly relied upon. But one of the things he said about his training, when I believe he was being interviewed by somebody, he got interviewed by many people, but he was talking to one of the interviewers, and he said, I actually hate training. I despise it. It sucks, basically, is what he's saying. Training sucks. I hate doing it. This is the world champion. This is one of the greatest boxers of all time. Says he hates training. So the next question obviously became, all right, so why did you do it? Why do you do it? Right? He said in his mind, he understood, look, if I suffer through this training now and continually, I can spend the rest of my life as the champion. That's true. The mentality had to be there first. It wasn't like, oh, well, I had to, here's my routine. I have to get up in the morning and I have my coffee and I stretch and I do all these things. It's like, no. I had to come up with a reason why suffering through that particular training was important. And it's no different from anybody engaging in any level of fitness or learning, for example, techniques of self-defense. The first thing that you have to, the first hurdle, your first hurdle and your biggest hurdle that might even become a continual hurdle as time goes on, a continual obstacle to be surmounted is your mentality. Are you ready and willing? And how do you get yourself to that point? Let's say whether you're overweight or you're underweight, you're trying to get your body physically right. You're trying to get to that point of health. It's not about doing the push-up. It's not about doing the squat. Those things trust me, they are remarkably easy. And I'll show you some examples of videos that I've taken. It's getting yourself into the mental space where you decide that this is worth doing. Pursuing physical fitness is worth doing. Now, that begs the obvious question. How, Cheidy? How do I get myself to the point where I believe that physical fitness is worth the time and the sacrifice and the discomfort, right? How is it worth suffering? As Muhammad Ali was saying. Why would I want to train when I obviously hate it? I hate doing burpees. Why do you want me to do them? The reason is something that you have to come up with. But I believe that the genesis of that reason, the catalyst for it, the origin point for that reason, has to do with what our host, one of my co-hosts, had mentioned at the beginning of this series, which is, it has to do with love. It has to do with self-love. You're going to have to get to a point where you decide, I'm a human being. My life has meaning. And if I don't think it has meaning, at the very least, I know that it has some sort of value to it. I can contribute something to the world. I have something to offer. What would happen if I treated myself like I was somebody I loved to death? One of the things I ask some of the people that I've trained when they're struggling through this piece, because please do not underestimate the mental burden, please. What would you do, or what would you say to yourself if you were your own child? Would you say, no, don't worry about doing any of that stuff. You don't need to worry about being winded when you walk up the stairs, or, not being able to lift your backpack without considerable effort, or having difficulty pushing doors open, or being overweight or being underweight. You don't have to worry about any of that. You'd be lying to that person, right? You'd be lying to your kid if you told them those words. You want the best for that child, right? You want the best for somebody you love. And you know that it doesn't necessarily mean that you say, all right, kid, you're going to be the world bodybuilding, you're going to be Mr. or Mrs. Universe. I don't know. But what you might say is, hey, I'd like you to be the best that you can be. I'd like you to pursue your potential. And it doesn't even necessarily have through a particular version of fitness. If you don't like touching weights, don't touch weights. You don't like doing resistant band work, don't do them. There's plenty of other ways to get fit. You can dance. You could dance your way into fitness. You can moonwalk your way into a sexy body, right? You could do any manner of things. You could play DDR, Dance Dance Revolution. It's a game that was popular in like late 90s, early 2000s. I don't know if you younger folk know about it. But there's any number of things that you could do physically in order to get yourself fit. The whole purpose of it, though, as long as the driver is the pursuit of one's potential, is that self-love that I was talking about, you're going to be able to achieve it no matter what you're doing. It could be through swimming. It could be through becoming the best double Dutch champion in the world, or just the best jump rope skipper on your block. You could play basketball. You could play any number of sports. You could cheerlead. You could crump, breakdance, whatever the case is. You can use pretty much any of those vehicles in order to achieve fitness, as long as your primary motivation is, or at the root of it, the foundation of it, is love for the self. That's a solid foundation that's not going to move, bend, break, crack. If you've got self-love as your foundation for what you're doing. And along with that foundation, you're going to be able to engage, to notice that you're going to be able to engage in several processes of healing. So one thing that the reason why I promote physical fitness as a means through healing is because when you do something physically difficult, it's not your body that quits first. If your body quit, you would have bruises, your muscles and sinew would snap, and you would be rendered physically incapable of doing something. When you're on a treadmill, or when you're doing planks, or when you're doing sit-ups, or the push-up, or the squat, the first thing that quits, it's not your legs, it's not your quadriceps, it's not your hamstrings, it's not your gluteus maximus or your gluteus medius, it's not your deltoids, it's not your lower lumbar, it's your mind. Your mind quits first. Your mind starts to, man, what are we doing here? What are we doing here? This is awful. I'm in so much pain. This sucks. Who am I kidding? I can't do this. It's the self-talk that makes doing those different exercises difficult. It's not your body. Your body can, trust me, the human body can endure a tremendous amount of physical punishment and trauma before it actually quits. You would be blown away with the feats of strength that you right now are capable of, right this moment. It's not your body. It's not the muscles. It's not the nerve endings. It's the mind. Right here. That's where it starts. But if you have that foundation of self-love, when you get to that treadmill, when you get to that plank, it's like, oh man, I can't quit. I can't quit. I know what I could be. I know what I want to be. I want to be better than what I am. So it's almost like it's weird, but when you talk to people who perform at an insanely high degree, I'm talking about the 1% of physical performers and athletes in the world. When you talk to them about what they say to themselves, like ultra marathon runners, it's almost like they have multiple personalities, right? They're telling themselves like, shut up, man, we're going to do this. They refer to themselves in the plural because they acknowledge that there's almost like there's multiple sides, at least two. There's one that wants you to be the best that you could be. And there's another side of you that's just like, we're okay with the status quo. We're okay with the path of least resistance. Stay in bed. Scroll through Instagram, Twitter, just laugh the day away. It's fine, man. Just relax. Eat the Cheetos. It's all good. You don't have to worry about diet. Don't worry about any of that stuff. Just engage in this nihilistic hedonism. It's all good. Nothing matters. So just enjoy the ride. And that other part of you that it's always there. It almost starts out as like a whisper, but you can turn the volume up on that voice. You can amplify it. The one that says, hey, come on, get up. You're not done. This isn't all you are. And it's definitely not all you could be. You haven't peaked. Not even close. We don't even know what we could be if we tried. It's the mentality. Right? Now, once you have that mentality, how physical fitness can serve as a vehicle for self-emancipation. What I mean by emancipation, it's not necessarily from physical bonds and slavery. You don't have shackles around your ankles or your wrists, right? But as, once again, the late, great Malcolm X had said, you have shackles over your mind. You have self-imposed limitations. Before you begin a task, you already have some sort of self-talk, this narrative, this story that you've been telling yourself for a while. Or you allow like this monologue, this negative creature to get up on its podium and start speaking negatively. Like, why are you even bothering with this, man? Like, just give up. Give up. You know you can't do this. Who are you kidding? Not true. That's the side of you. That's the very human part of you that simply wants to exist with the least amount of effort possible. That's what it is. If I'm not fit now, like, look, we got this far in life. Why am I need to be fit? Well, I'll give you a couple of reasons why. Number one, it'll benefit your capacity to deal with struggles in life and suffering and trauma tremendously. Right? Yes, absolutely, Bridget, absolutely. You argue with yourself. And I do the same thing, guys. I do the same thing. When I'm down, when I put on my weighted vest and I'm on set number 3 of weighted pull-ups or weighted chin-ups, and I do the first 5. Okay, I'm going for 10. 6 gets a little bit hard, but it's all right. 7, I get to 8, and it's like, and already there's that little voice now. See, I've reversed the roles. The little voice is the one that says, hey, man, give up. It's fine. You did enough. You're doing enough work. Look at you. You got the muscles for days, man. Relax. And that's that other part of me that says, hey, shut up, man. It's still our set. We still got work to do. I'm not done. So even me, even somebody like me, then you could talk to anybody, any athlete. In fact, one of the best recent interviews that I've seen is between Joe Rogan and Mike Tyson. And if you're not aware, Mike Tyson at 54 years old is now re-entering the ring for exhibition matches for charity, right? Because one, he likes boxing, and 2, he wants to help people. And he's having a match with Roy Jones Jr. So 2 of the greatest boxers of all time, right, are now going to fight each other in their twilight years, or supposedly their twilight years. And one of the things that Mike Tyson had said about his training process. So we go on Instagram and we see that he's ripping through the pads. He looks fantastic. He looks like he's in his prime. And when he was in the interview with Joe Rogan, he said right after that was done filming, right after that day, he was done exercising, he went home and he was like, he was in so much pain. He was in bed for a week. He said he was crying to his wife. He was like, what was I thinking? This was the dumbest idea possible. Who the hell am I thinking at 54 years old, I can just start boxing like nothing's happened? The mentality. His body didn't quit while he was doing the filming. His body didn't quit during the training. But when he got home and he started to feel the effects, that voice came into play. And then he remembered why he was doing it in the first place. I like boxing. I love it. It's my life. I also like helping people. And he says in the interview, it's like, that's what really gets him out of bed. Like, that's what's kept him going, is the prospect of helping other people. Of all the money that he's going to get, or his organization's going to get from doing this exhibition match with Roy Jones Jr., donating that to charity. That's what's motivating him. So he was able to be like, all right, yeah, training sucks, but I've got a good why for doing it. I've got a real powerful reason for why I'm doing it. One, I love boxing. Me, as a person, as a human being, I love boxing. Number 2, I love helping people. I can use what I love to help people, which is also something I love doing. Love, that foundation, rock solid. So even after being laid out in a bed for a whole week in incredible pain, crying to his wife, he was able to get back up, and now he looks like a champion all over again. Mike Tyson, the beast, is back. And he's not back in that same capacity where he just wants to inflict harm and beat down his opponents. He's back because he loves boxing and he wants to help people. That's what's getting him through it. You can unlock that same sort of energy through your own self-narrative in your story. And the reason that aids in your healing process, of any sort of healing process, is because you start to peel back the layers upon layers of falsehoods and lies and these self-imposed limitations that you put on yourself. And some of them are there for good reason. Some of them are there because you wanted to protect yourself from getting hurt again. I get it. Trauma is no laughing matter at all. Physical, mental, but all trauma is mental, really, when you get down to it. All of those things are powerful. But believe me when I say that despite all of those dark, negative things, that the light that you can manifest within you is far stronger, blows it out of the water every time. You just completely scour it out with your own inner light. As long as the reason that you're engaging in that physical pursuit, in that what is essentially you're tormenting yourself. In fact, within the scientific literature, you know, bros, when you go to the gym, they might say, oh yeah, you're gonna rip apart that muscle. You're gonna break so much muscle today, bro. But really, in science, what you're doing is you're traumatizing your muscle. That's suffering, okay? That's suffering right there. You're trauma. You are inflicting physical trauma upon the muscle fibers in your body. That's suffering. But you'll find that you're able to bear it all. That and much more, as long as you can go back to that foundation of self-love and asking yourself, why am I here? Why am I up at 7 a.m. on a treadmill? Why? Why? The why is so important. It's so important. And once you get it, rooted out of that self-love, you're going to be able to do amazing things. And all the other self-limitations and lies that you told yourself, that you're not good enough, that you're not fast enough, you're too fat, or you're too skinny, you're too weak, you're too small, you're too this or that. All those things start to break down and fade away because you start being able to do things. The challenges that were set before you, the physical challenges that were set before you, you were able to complete. So then all of a sudden, all those reasons, like, it starts to ring a little bit hollow, doesn't it? Like, my whole life, I've been telling myself I'm too weak, or I'm too fat, or I'm too lazy, or I'm too this or that in order to get myself in shape. And I just did 10 minutes on a treadmill. Maybe I'm not too insert self-depreciation here. Maybe I'm enough. Maybe I'm more than enough. So let's see where this goes. How far can I take this? The narrative starts to change. In the way that you view yourself. In social psychology, or psychology in general, we call this a schema. The way that you view yourself in your environment, everything around you, your schema starts to change. Instead of going through life like a victim or somebody that's worthless, you start to think that you have value. Why? Because you put yourself through something physically trying and you persevered through it. Why? Not because your muscles are so big and strong and you look so great, but because in your mind, you told yourself, we are going to do this because it's worth it. I am willing myself through this particular struggle. And once you realize that you've done that, whoa, man, whoa, crazy. You take off. You realize it's dangerous too. Why is it dangerous? Because now all the other excuses can't work. They can't work. You can't tell yourself that you're too fat or you're too skinny when you did it in that present state. You run out of excuses. That's why it's scary. And that has to do with that voice and that self-narrative that we tell ourselves. If part of the reason people are hesitant to begin their journey, part of the reason, not the whole reason, but part of the reason they're hesitant, is because they realize once they start in their present state and they achieve a milestone, or they get to a checkpoint, or they X out a goal, they realize that they don't have any more excuses, right? So within the realm of psychology, you might come across what's called cognitive dissonance, which is basically a schema that you had about yourself or about your environment or reality or about any particular thing gets challenged by perceived reality. So if your schema of the self is, I can't do this work, I just can't plank, man, I can't do it. Then you get a trainer, or you go on YouTube and you get inspired, and in that moment of motivation that serves as a spark, you're driven and you will yourself to do that activity. And then you're like, whoa, I actually can do that. What else have I been telling myself that I can't do that I actually can? And what responsibility now do I have as a human being now that I know these things about myself? So the schema was X activity is impossible, but you just did it. So cognitive dissonance comes into play. It's that turmoil. It's a transitory phase, cognitive dissonance. It's a tumult that you experience in your mind when you're trying to figure out, you're trying to make sense. All right, something I thought was impossible, I just did. So clearly it's possible. So now how am I going to think about this moving forward? Cognitive dissonance is one of those things that your mind will take shortcuts. It will take the path of least resistance. It's trying to be an efficient machine. So it says, it's just a fluke. Don't worry about it. Or you didn't even do the exercise properly. It's still impossible. So don't even bother trying to do it again because it's way too difficult. Your brain will come up with these different reasons, these rationales, true or false, doesn't matter. It's just trying to get rid of that cognitive dissonance. But if you're changing your schema to coincide with the actions that you're carrying out each day, the level of cognitive dissonance that you experience is reduced. So it's no longer a big, staticky tumult in your head, trying to figure out or trying to reconcile, between the impossible and possible. Now it's just, hey, I told myself I could do this thing and I did it. I actually did it. So I don't need to go back to that previous version of myself that was so concerned with not being hurt or not failing at an activity or an exercise. Because now you can do it. So, speaking of exercises and different things that you can do with your body, there's a number of different fundamental exercises that lie within the branch of what's called, within the fitness world, it's called calisthenics. Calisthenics. And calisthenics is just a fancy way to say body weight exercise. It means you're not using any equipment. It is just you, your body, your mind, your soul, and the earth you live on. That's it. That's all you need to complete calisthenics. So wherever you're at, you could do it outside. You could do it, some of these things you could do in a car. You could do on the driveway. You could do in your bedroom. You could do on the bed. You could do on the carpet, on the rug, in the bathroom. It doesn't matter. You could do dips on a toilet seat. But we'll get into that. I don't actually recommend you do that because your toilet might slide and break and whatnot. But there's a number of different foundational exercises, and most of these are what are called compound movements. And a compound movement it basically means it's something that involves or recruits multiple regions of muscle fibers on your body. So one of the most popular compound movements is the squat, right? So the squat, if you guys aren't familiar with that, I'm sure you are, but just in case, is a movement that people primarily associate with the legs, right? Thighs. You're squatting down, and it's now being heavily associated with your glutes or your butt. But that depends on your squat depth and what muscle regions you're going to recruit. But the reason it's a compound movement is because it doesn't just rely on your quadriceps, which are the top of your thigh. It also relies a little bit on the other muscles. So the hamstrings get involved with the squat during the eccentric movement. So eccentric is when you are lowering yourself, right? On the squat in particular. So I'm going to pull up I'll try to share with you guys some videos that I had taken that should show my training videos, calisthenics. Here we go. I'll show you guys exactly what I'm talking about. And I'll go through and I'll try to break these things down. I'll give you like a little analysis on what's happening in each one. All right, so can everybody see that?
Yep, I can see it.
Awesome, awesome. All right, thank you. Thank you, Hashim. Everybody gives me the thumbs up. Ty, are you good? You can see that? Hope you can. Let me lower that. Ooh. All right. So what you're about to see here is a squat. It's about a 10-second video that I put together. So that's the movement. Very simple. But the reason this is a compound lift is because, so we go back here. Right now, I'm in the down position, or I'm in the completed position of the squat, or you could say even the starting position, depending on your perspective and what you're actually doing with the movement. So I'm down here. I'll give you guys another perspective so you can see the angulation of my back and my spine, because that's very important when you're executing these movements. So my hands are pretty much out in front of me in a nice, comfortable position. When you're doing calisthenics, a lot of it, you don't have to worry about the placement of all of your body parts all of the time. It's more about what you're comfortable with. So when you're in that position, right now, my body weight is being loaded onto my thighs. They're bearing most of the weight. And as I go up, I flex, or I push through my feet, extending the quadriceps, right? So right now, or in that moment, I'm in a seated position or in a squatted position. To execute or to complete the squat, you stand back up, you right your position, you resume standing. And in doing so, you push up and you activate depending on the depth of your squat. So there I was actually activating some of my glutes. So right underneath and the top of my quadricep as I'm pushing through. Now, depending on how you finish, you'll also end up activating even more of your glutes and a little bit of your hamstrings. Let's go up. I sort of lock out. You can't really tell from this angle. I'll give you guys another one, but there's a slight tuck basically of the pelvic region, right? And that's just below the belly button, if you guys are confused about where that is in particular. And I'd sort of end up doing like a mild hip thrust forward in order to squeeze and activate the glutes, and that lights up the hamstrings and the glutes. So not only am I hitting the anterior, the front with my quads, I'm also activating a little bit of that posterior chain, which goes from your lower back all the way down through your calves. But most people are referring to from low back to the end of your hamstrings. Let me see if I can pull up the other. Get that side view going. Yeah, okay, there it is. So you can see here that my spine is staying in that nice neutral position the whole time. It's not curved, it's not arched, right? I'm not trying to, twerk. I'm doing a squat, okay? So typically in most movements, you want your spine to be as static as possible during that time. And if it's not, then it's okay. You don't need to freak out or anything, but you should be aware of it, because it is something that could, if you do it incorrectly repeatedly, you could end up incurring an injury or encouraging some sort of complications with your muscles or your structure later on. So you definitely don't want that. But so you can see here at the squatted position, when I'm at the end of the movement or the start, depending on how you want to look at it, I'm just below 90 degrees, basically, on this squat, which means now that instead of my quadriceps being loaded here and taking over or the majority of it, my quads are still loaded, but now in order to execute that lift, right, in order to actually thrust and get my body up, the glutes have to be activated and initiate. So again, the reason why it's a compound movement is because it's not like doing, for example, a leg extension. So a leg extension would be, pretend this is like the top of my quad and I flex upwards, right? That's the leg extension. That's something that's a machine that isolates your quadricep, right, through that extension. But when you're doing the squat, you get all these other different muscles involved. And it's a quite good move for you to do, particularly if you're somebody that finds yourself, even if you're standing or particularly if you're sitting a lot all day. The squat is a very important movement. I imagine that's something a lot of us are doing these days due to our various circumstances in quarantine. I'm in Boston, so things are kind of semi-open. I can go places, and I do take walks, but more often than not, if your work is remote at all, you're primarily sitting down, right? So, and even if you're standing a lot, right, anything in excess can be a problem. So you're going to want to execute those movements in order to keep yourself fit. But that's the squat. Very basic, very standard. Keep your spine in a neutral position. Keep your arms in a nice balanced point. You don't want them flopping about, right? You don't need them throwing off your weight. Keep them static. Lower yourself to the ground and extend up and resume the standing position. And your feet, you don't have to go super wide, although you can, and that will activate different portions of your muscles, of your muscular anatomy. But standard squat will be good enough to hit just about everything a little bit. So feet shoulder width apart, go down nice and easy. And the more controlled that you have over these movements, the stronger you are going to be, not only with your muscles, but also with your tendons. And through this, you can promote healing of your body, particularly if you're somebody that wakes up with aches and pains in the morning, particularly in your back. Right. So another exercise that we're going to go through here, most of this you'll seeing is like centered around the core and the lower region of your body, because that's, as Ayin was saying, for example, we carry a lot of our stress on our hips. Guys, same thing. You don't have to be a lady to carry your stress on your hips. And for a lot of guys as well, our hips and our lower body, it's woefully undertrained. We don't do a lot for our glutes and we don't do a lot for our hips. But thankfully with these different exercises, these very basic ones, you'll be able to get quite a bit of strength back. And this is all no equipment, none. I mean, you don't even need clothes. I mean, I'm not going to show you that. Obviously, I'm not going to work out nude, but you don't even need clothes to do these movements. Now, it might be slightly more comfortable depending on your level of endowment, but nothing is needed to get this stuff done. Nothing. So next exercise we have here is what I would call so people call, there's a bunch of different names. And that's something you also realize when you're looking up fitness stuff. There's a bunch of different names for every exercise. This one, I describe it and I sort of came to call it like the sprinter lunge, because it looks like you're you can see it looks like I'm about to take off on a sprint in a race. But you could also simply call it the reverse lunge. So instead of stepping forwards and loading the forward leg, I'm stepping backwards, right? And this lights up even more that posterior chain. And I'm not sure I have another angle of this one. No, I don't have another angle of this one. But again, the spine is in that neutral position, not arched, not curved. Keeping my chest nice and tall. And you can tell that the spine is aligned because my chin is basically static and staying in alignment. If I was hunched over, you would see that my shoulders would round a little bit, but everything is nice, solid, and relaxed. And this is a very simple movement. Once again, you don't need a lot of space to do. You simply just step back, drop that knee to the floor, nice and controlled. And again, the slower you do it, the more strength that you will build. So this is something that you guys should know on your fitness journey. If you're looking for strength in particular, doing slow eccentric movements or emphasizing the eccentric movement, basically when you are coming out of that movement or preparing for it, will build additional strength. But if you're more interested in power, and let's go ahead and define power. I know, Ty, for example, you're a real wizard with physics. So there's a bunch of different explanations or scientific understandings for power. But within athleticism and fitness and the biomechanics of the body, when we're just talking about power in terms of these movements, it's basically how much strength can you exert over time, or how quickly can you exert a certain amount of strength over time. So, for example, if I was focusing on strength with my pull-ups, I would go very slow, get to the top, hold, maybe pause, and then slowly engage that eccentric movement as I'm lowering myself to the ground, right? Same thing with these squats, these lunges. Slow movements, taking your time and pausing, will help to build extra strength. But in terms of power, right, now you'd want to add an element of speed to it. So imagine that you're doing these things for time, right? So let's say you give yourself 30 seconds or a minute, and you're going to go as quickly as you can through each of the movements. That will help you develop power. So how quickly can you do something, how quickly or how fast you can do something. Another popular example is, for example, if you had a sled, if you've ever been in a gym and you have access to a sled, it's something that you push or you pull. So strength would be, you don't care how long it's going to take you, you're going to load that thing up with as much weight as possible, and you're going to push. And you're going to get to that finish point, and that's it. But with power, you're going to load it up with as much weight as you can, and you're going to time yourself to see how quickly you can get to that finish line, pushing or pulling that sled. So there's an element of that, right? And you could see that. So if you engage in any sort of martial arts, that's what we talk about when we talk about power, right? It's like adding the marriage between speed and strength results in power. So now moving on to the next foundational exercise that I do here, the push-up. The push-up. Very simple exercise, but something that people get wrong all the time. And it drives me nuts because I know they're cruising for injury when you do this exercise in particular incorrectly. Why? Because it involves the shoulder, right? The push-up does indeed affect and involve and recruit muscles in the shoulder. And if your posture is jacked up on the push-up, you're going to end up getting some sort of impingement or soreness, or maybe even like dislocation if you're going too crazy. And you don't want that. Shoulder injuries are the most common injury in like any physical exercise ever. If you've done roofing, if you are a golfer, if you play football, basketball, MMA, doesn't matter. If you do any physical activity for a long period of time, the injury that you're most likely to incur is a shoulder injury, because it's a very versatile joint. It's responsible for a lot of different movements. But without further ado, let's get into it. So that's the standard push-up right there. So my hands a little bit wider than shoulder width apart, my back nice and neutral. I go down. Now here's the point where you don't want to cheat yourself on push-ups. You want to go down and see if you can basically touch. You see, like my beard is basically kissing my carpet right there. Like I'm going right down to it. I'm licking the floor. Don't actually lick the floor, but have your chest hit the ground, right? The reason that we're doing that is so that we're recruiting the most muscle. We're loading more muscle fibers because we're executing the fullest range of motion that we can with that particular push-up. If we only do these half up and down, you're getting some benefit, but you're leaving a lot of your muscles out of it. You're cutting a lot of your muscles in your pectorals out of the picture, and even in your triceps. So it's a great upper body exercise. It hits the deltoids, it hits the triceps, and it hits the chest. And if you're really gonna emphasize the eccentric motion of it, when you're lowering yourself to the ground, you're really gonna feel it in your chest, and you might even light up your biceps a little bit as well. So that's an exercise that you definitely wanna get right, even though it's very simple. The simplest exercises are the ones that you can mess up pretty much on the easiest, I think. It only takes one like awkward placement of the arm or the elbow or whatever. Now, about the elbow, you'll see that they're tucked in close to my sides, right? Or almost. They're either just maybe slightly diagonal or tucked in. You never, when you're doing a push-up, you never want to internally or like externally rotate that shoulder, right? By flaring your elbow out. That's how you would do that. You get that really awkward rotation of the shoulder, and now all of a sudden you're loading your anterior delt in a very, very awkward position. So you don't want to do that. Don't do push-ups like this. It's a big no-no. Big no-no. Again, doing push-ups like that will definitely lead you into shoulder pain and injury. And that will cut, because the shoulder is involved again in so many of those other movements. If you do that and you get a shoulder injury, you're going to take a long time to get back into your physical fitness. So when we're talking about using physical fitness as an avenue or vehicle for healing, not a vehicle for injury, right? So we want to make sure that our form is proper and adequate when we're executing all these different movements. I will show you guys the same movement modified and the same movement from the front. So first I'll start with the front and I will reshare the screen. Boom. All right, should be up. So you can see once again how I'm like basically kissing the ground. And you could see how close my elbows are to my body there. And that's basically the position you want to be. Don't flare your elbows. Don't load your shoulders in that awkward pattern, because you will pretty much guarantee yourself an injury. Keep your chest to the floor, feet together, everything locked in, nice and straight. I go down, push myself straight up. Almost like I'm trying to basically push my house into the ground. Like that's my mental image. Obviously I'm not that strong, but certainly you can pretend that you are, right? Like you're moving the earth away from you. It's a good way to think about it. So a lot of people too, when they're doing their push-ups, sometimes they'll actually engage in some flexion on their neck by looking up. I aid in the neutrality of my spine by continuing. I don't put my chin to my chest, but I keep it once again in that neutral position. The reason for that is I don't want to strain my neck while I'm doing the push-up. Right? I don't want to add any sort of extra load to it. I'll keep it static in that isometric position. So I know depending on what you do, like if military people they might say, you know, eyes up or something like that. But if you're really promoting the healthiest posture possible with the push-up, that's what you're going for. And now I will show you guys a modified version of it. And that's basically when you're on your knees, but the principle is exactly the same. Exactly the same principle is being executed here. Chest to the floor, shoulders are not being crazily rotated. Elbows are in and not flared. Back is straight. Only thing that changed is now my knees are on the ground. The reason that you would do that is so that you can take some body weight off of your pectorals. So it becomes an easier way. If you're somebody that struggles with doing any of these movements, there's typically a way to modify them in order to make them a little bit easier. So if you're not super concerned about modifying this, you don't need to worry about it. But one thing that I like to do when I'm doing my exercises, my calisthenic exercises, I'll do as many as I can do, let's say regular, and then I'll go into my modified version when my muscle starts to fail, so that I can continue to stress out and traumatize and work out that muscle a little bit more. So just because you're done doing regular, you know, the regular version of whatever exercise you're doing, it doesn't mean that you can't get into the modified version to squeeze a little bit more effort out of your muscles, which is something that is tremendously helpful. You could even include that as what's called a drop set, which basically just means drop set typically refers to weights. So if I was doing bench press, let's say I'm benching whatever, 100 pounds, then as soon as I get to failure, I start to feel my form start to break down on 100 pounds, I drop it down to 75. Then I dropped it down to 50. Then I dropped it down to 35, so on and so forth, right? So in the same fashion in calisthenics, if I'm doing a full push-up, then I can go into that half or modified push-up right after I feel my form start to break down, so I can continue to train those muscle groups even after I've reached maximum effort on one particular exercise. So it's a good way for you to get fit. All right. So that pretty much that's it for the basic exercises that I'm going to demonstrate for you guys. And now in the last bit of time that we have left, we have about 20 minutes before we're going to rejoin the group. We are going to go over why you might want to consider fitness, not only as an avenue for healing and self-emancipation, for manifesting that more positive self-talk, that self-love, that respect, and demanding better from yourself, but why that's not just good for you, why it's good for your community. So let's get this out of the way. Return you lovely people to the center of my screen. Oh, I didn't even see the chat. Is it okay if your butt is in the air? Yes, when you're doing the modified push-up. When you're doing the modified push-up, it is a-okay for your butt to be in the air. But again, it's not like you're not trying to twerk, okay? You are doing a push-up. So you're not trying to like over-exaggerate the arch or curvature in your back. You're simply just changing the angulation because you're on your knees as opposed. So the starting position for your body is now angled upwards as opposed to being more flat. That's it. So good question. Right. So why would you want to be fit? Why is that important? Why is it important for you to pursue your physical potential? Right. One interesting quote that I read, and I didn't even know this until I think it was a year or two ago when I stumbled across this quote. I believe it was Aristotle, but somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, who was talking about fitness and why it's important for men in particular to be fit. But I'm adapting that to be all humans. But the quote goes something like, how wretched it would be for a man to live his entire life without understanding the potential, the physical potential of his own body. He really was lamenting it. Like that's like, for him, he was considering it to be a tragedy. Like, man, there are people who go their entire lives without pushing themselves physically and understanding what they're capable of. And I believe that's pretty pervasive in today's society, where there's a lot of sedentary, meaning you're stationary, sitting down, not a whole lot of activity. There's a lot of people going through life without understanding just how amazing their body is physically. But even barring that, the reason that I believe you'd want to take your fitness seriously is that you can affect other people in your community by taking your fitness seriously. And even not in your community, just in your own family, right? You become a more capable person. I don't know what humanity is going to look like in 10,000 years, but I know for now, we're still very much physical creatures. We're bounded to the physical realm. And your level of fitness affects your ability to interact and affect the environment that you exist in. So if you're somebody that's physically fit, you can bear your weight, and not just your weight, but additional weight. You're able to do things for yourself, around your own house, around your family, and around your community that people can begin to look up to you for doing so. They'll begin to admire you, right? Especially if there's an obvious change in your physique. If you're somebody that's underweight or overweight, and all of a sudden you start looking a little broad, you're stretching out the sleeves on your shirt a little bit, people will be like, whoa. It was Socrates. Thank you, Todd. No man has the right to be an amateur in the matter of physical training. It is a shame for a man to grow old without seeing the beauty and strength of which his body is capable. Whew. Whew. That's cold. That's cold. I love that. I love that. Thank you, Ty. That's good. It was not Aristotle, it was Socrates, and I very, very undersold you the quote the first time, so I'm glad you pulled it up. But so not only is it important for you to understand the beauty and the strength of your own body just for you, but for other people. You can show other people in your community what their body is capable of. So think about, for example, why some people get a little bit uncomfortable when they see somebody that is just like, that's actually beautiful, right? When you see somebody that's beautiful, why it might be uncomfortable for you to look at a beautiful person is because it's almost like you're looking at potential. You know what you could be, or what in a more negative interpretation, you're like, oh man, I could never be that beautiful. I could never be that strong or that fast or whatever. But with the slight tweaking, again, changing that foundation, it doesn't become, I could never be that. It becomes, whoa, I could look like Ty. Whoa, I could look like Bridget. Whoa, I could look like Hashim. That's crazy. That's crazy. And not only does that work for children, but it works for your peers. I've gotten many messages on Snapchat, where I was the most active before I began working on all these different projects. Many people from other guys, not my age because I'm older than most, but younger than me, but still adults, saying like, dude, like, how did you do that? How do I want to get that fit, you know? And that's because I took my own physical fitness seriously. I'm not going to say I'm a master in physical training, but I'm no amateur. I'm no amateur when it comes to physical training. And that had a positive effect on the people around me. And so another thing that I do quite often, and that I encourage you guys to do as well, even if you don't have access to a gym, go to your playground, go to your local playground and work out there. And if you guys are interested and you're keeping up with me and you follow me on different social media, I'll be putting out a bunch of different content where I'll be able to demonstrate to you guys just how much you can get done with no capital, right? With not a dollar to your name, just existing out in the world, how fit you can get using the basic amenities, basically, by virtue of living in a community. And what happens is when I go out and I'm doing pull-ups or I'm doing dips on the bars or I'm exercising on the monkey bars or anything like that, kids, particularly during the summertime before, quarantine lockdown had been enacted, would come up to me and be very curious, man, very curious and very interested in what I was doing. And it was a joy for me to be able to teach some of those kids the basic physical movements. And what that did was it brought me closer to my community. It started to dispel some of the myths that I would tell myself, even though I knew that they weren't true. The little intrusive thoughts like, oh man, I live in a dangerous world. Everything's dangerous. Everything's out to get me. I got to be careful. I got to be, looking for, on the lookout for violence all the time. I apologize. Speaking of my neighborhood, I live on a very popular street. So anytime something happens, sirens will pass by. Anyway, being able to reconnect with my community in that way was very powerful for me. Very, very powerful, and helped me with dealing with my own trauma and my own healing process. And I realized that in those moments that I did have something tangible to offer other human beings. I may not be like a fitness Instagram star, with hundreds of thousands of followers, but still the actions I took that day and the days after meant something significant to those kids I was interacting with on the playground. And by extension, it meant something to their mothers who were there with them, right? I had very lovely, interesting, powerful conversations with them. Some of them were Somali, some of them were Black, some of them were Latino. I got just a beautiful experience interacting with my community in that way because I decided to not be an amateur in matters physical. That's what it can do for you. And even though I'm doing something physical, I'm stressing, I'm traumatizing my body, I end up engaging my community in such a way that helps all of us learn and grow. I'm having conversations with people I wouldn't normally see on a day-to-day. We didn't grow up speaking, the same language. I grew up speaking English. They grew up speaking Somali or Arabic or Spanish or whatever the case is. And we're still able to connect through that moment. That's not something that should be underestimated. So if you find yourself feeling isolated or alone, especially during this time, remember that you're not, and other people are feeling just as isolated as you. And if you go out and you put yourself out there by simply maximizing your own potential, even if it is just in matters physical, you'll find yourself making connections that far outstrip and go way beyond the physical. And you'll benefit yourself and your community in very tangible ways. These actions that we take on a day-to-day basis have a rippling effect on not just ourselves, our own being, but it has an effect on the people around us. And this is what I think is meant when people say, You can be a force for good. You can be a source for light. It doesn't mean that you have to be Batman or Iron Man or some, comic book representation of a superhero. I think I believe a heroic action is you taking steps to pursue your own potential. Not only is it good for you, but you're showing every single person in your community and any other environment that you exist in what they could be as well. And you start to show them, especially if you're somebody who's coming from an even worse off position. Me personally, I was a little underweight. I've never been overweight in my life. I was skinny, right? But there's not too many people in my environment who know that or who could see me at that point. But if you're somebody right now in your life where you're struggling physically, you're overweight or you're underweight, and there are people in your environment, church, the school, the book club you go to, whatever the case is, people you play video games with online, whatever the case is, if they know that about you, and then they start to see that change, that's going to mean something to them. They're not going to forget that ever. And don't be surprised if people later on hit you up like, hey man, you look great and you didn't always look great. I'm paraphrasing what they might say. How can I do that? Can you help me out? Can you give me some tips? Ripple. We're not people living in an island. We are a community. We really are. And you can zoom out as much as you want to the global. We're a community on an earth-wide scale, or you could say, all right, just the people on my street. They're my community. You're connected to those people, and the things that you do or the things that you don't do affect them. And I think one of the ways that we can reach people very obviously is through the pursuit of our own physical potential, is through the pursuit of physical fitness. I believe it's very important. And it's something that I know has helped me and helped others based on the messages that I've gotten tremendously on their own journeys. Whether it's dealing with their own traumas, confronting with, the demons of their past, people that have been bullied. I've been bullied throughout almost my entire academic career. I was bullied up until university and the very tail end of high school, right? When you're pursuing these things and you're starting to decode and again, strip away those self-imposed limitations, strip away the internalized negativity that you've been absorbing from other people for so long, it's a powerful thing. It's a very powerful thing. So Socrates is right. It is a shame. It would be a shame for you to grow old and not know what you're physically capable of. But I would say even more than that, it's not just a shame to not know what you're capable of. It's a shame to know that you could have affected so many other people. And again, affecting somebody doesn't mean that you attain celebrity status. It means that you do something that sticks with them, that they remember, that has a tangible consequence on their existence. You create a moment in time that they're going to think back to repeatedly over and over again, just by having a simple interaction with you. Doesn't mean that you got super brolic and then you're now acting as like the next Captain America or whatever in a Marvel film, or you become the next Spider-Man or whatever. It's not what I'm not talking about achieving celebrity status. That almost to me is over-indexed and somewhat worthless. What really matters is how you're able to connect to the people around you. Okay, so all of that said, in the last different portion, let's go over some things that when you're training or when you're exercising, things you can say to yourself. So self-talk is very important, but it doesn't even necessarily need to be positive. So some very high-performing people often talk about what they do when they're training and how they get themselves over a training hump or an exercise hump, or how they deal with their diet that they don't really like, but they know that they should do. One of the things that they engage in is that self-talk. And one of the more powerful things that you can do, again, this is backed by sociology and psychology, social psychology, if you will, all of those things, is creating not only something you want to go towards, but something that you want to move away from. So again, continuing on with the example of weight, if you're currently overweight or you're underweight, you can think of a situation where maintaining that weight would be very unhealthy for you to do. You're going to have a serious consequence. There's some tangible consequence that will happen to you as a result of being overweight or underweight or unskilled or whatever the case is. You could die. You increase the risk of heart attack. You increase the risk of you breaking bones. All right. There's all these sort of health risk and factors that come with low or being underweight or overweight. So that's something that you can move away from and you can bring up if you're on the treadmill or you're doing the plank or you don't want to, or you're thinking about breaking your diet. You can think about, wait, there's something I'm moving away from here. And by moving away from that, I'm also getting closer to the person that I know I could be. You know, the person with, I want to be able to see my abs, right? I want to see a 6-pack or 8-pack or whatever the case is, right? Not only is it good for you to move towards that particular goal, again, rooted in the foundation of self-love, but it's also powerful for you to have something to move away from. So for me, I don't want to be weak. That's what I'm moving away from. I don't want to be in a position where I can't get myself up off of the floor, where if somebody knocks me down, I can't push myself up again. I don't want to be in a position where I can't, and again, this is me personally, I don't want to be in a position where I can't carry one of my family members out of harm's way. Those things terrify me. They terrify me. So when I'm on my last set of deadlifts and I'm thinking about giving up, I'm like, well, I can do this last rep, or I can shortchange myself and potentially be too weak to pull my brother out of the fire, or away from a collapsing building, or get them out from underneath a car. It's a very powerful thing for me. And not only that, I'm thinking about who I could be. So when you're in those moments, it really comes down to that back to what Ty had mentioned earlier, that why has to be powerful. And part of that why should have two components to it. Why you should be moving away from something, and why you should be moving towards something else. So why am I working out? Well, why? Because I don't want to be weak and I want to be strong. Just very simple, put it in very simple terms. Or why am I working out? I'm working out because I want to be able to see my 8-pack and I want to be able to pick my children up and, give them piggyback rides without getting tired, right? No, I don't have any kids of my own, but I have, I'm an uncle to a bunch of kids. So yeah, it's, being physically fit has afforded me the opportunity to be very active and with people. And with that, I can see the effect it has on people, the energy that I bring to interactions, and just the physical capacity that I'm able to exude when I'm in these environments is incredibly powerful. And I hope that's something that you guys will be able to at least think about. And it doesn't even have to be something that you might consider altruistic. It doesn't, again, you don't have to try to be Captain America. You don't have to be Mr. Goody Two-Shoes and, straight edge, everything is right. You can have selfish reasons. It's okay. It's okay to have selfish reasons. Your selfish reason could just be, hey, I want to look good naked. Cool. Great. Good enough. As long as you have something that is meaningful to you that you can move towards, and something that you're worried about, or that you don't want to become, that you're moving away from, those things will carry you quite a bit of the way.